Okay, all of you can see the slide clearly?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, so for today's topic is the resident status. It's very easy. It's about how you want to determine whether the person, the individual or company, a person lah, okay, can be categorized as tax resident. Okay. So in this topic is talk about the 4 rules on determining how we want to determine whether the individual is tax resident or not. So in your textbook, in this chapter, it focus on individual and companies. But as for our subject, tax 1, we only we only covered the individual part and we didn't cover the company part. Okay, that's you will learn in your text 2. Okay, so for text 1, it's just about individual, how you want to determine the individual using 4 rules. And then there's also for government servant, the difference rule for government servant. And okay, I think that's all. So let's start. For resident status, the test of resident status, this is part of your textbook, your study text, you can refer. Okay, the test of resident status of a person, as mentioned in chapter 1, a person can be a company, body of people, corporation, individual, and limited liability partnership. But in our topic today, we only cover the individual part. So, in Malaysian Income Tax Act 1967, they use a quantitative test in order to determine the resident status of individual. Okay, for company, we didn't cover lah. Okay, for individual, they must satisfy the 4 rule. The various tests is 4 tests using the number of days the individual is present in Malaysia. Okay, individual means whether they are Malaysian citizen or non-Malaysian citizen, the foreigners lah. Okay, but these 4 rules is only applicable to non-government servant. For government servant, the 4 rules does not apply to them. Okay, we have a different rules for government servant here. The 4 rules does not apply to them for the government servant. Okay, so in the test of resident status of a person, we depends on the number of days the individual is present in Malaysia. Dia ada dekat Malaysia berapa lama. Itu determine dia punya resident status lah. Okay, so rule number 1, dia mesti ada di Malaysia 182 days or more. Okay, dia mesti ada dekat Malaysia lebih daripada 182 hari. That is for rule number 1. 182 days or more under section 7(1)(a) of the Income Tax Act 1967. Okay, kalau individual tu, whether Malaysian citizen or non-Malaysian citizen, is in Malaysia for 182 days, they are taxable. Okay, so for example, this Bernard is in Malaysia for the following period. For in the year assessment 2022, he is in Malaysia for 212 days. So it's more than 182 days. So meaning under section 7(1)(a), Bernard is a tax resident. Okay, so in year assessment 2023, so he is in Malaysia for only 121 days, so less than 182 days, so meaning he is a non-tax resident. So okay, it's simple. First rule is 182 days or more. Okay. And then the second rule is fewer than 182 days. Kalau tadi lebih daripada 182 hari under section 71A, but for this second rule, the individual, the person in Malaysia for less than 182 days, but it's considered tax resident if although he is in Malaysia for fewer than 182 days, but the period is linked to another period of 182 days. Okay, immediately preceding or immediately following. Okay, and then there are a certain temporary absent, okay, shall be taken to form part of such period. Yang ni temporary absent. Dia boleh absent dari Malaysia, dia boleh pergi overseas lah dari Malaysia. The temporary absent tu if it's connected with their service, contohnya dia ada business meeting dekat, contohnya dekat luar, Singapore ke India ke. So for business meeting is related to their employment, related to their service in Malaysia, ataupun attending conference atau seminar ataupun study abroad. Okay, because of the employment. And then second one is ill health, sakit, okay, involving themselves or a member of their immediate family. Okay, in this case, immediate family refers to only spouse, okay, husband or wife, children, and parents. Okay, not siblings, not uncle or aunties, grandparents, cannot. Only spouse, husband or wife, children, and parents. Okay, for their immediate family. And then in respect of social visit, not exceeding 14 days in aggregate. Social visit tu macam bercuti. Okay, vacation outside Malaysia for 14 days. Okay, for the second rules ni, if in the year assessment they are in Malaysia for less than 182 days, they can be considered as a tax resident if, okay, this period is linked to the period before that is more than 182, or the period in the following that is more than 182. Okay, this is a clear example. Okay, Billy is in Malaysia for the periods of from 1st December 2022 until 31st December, only 31 days or 1 month. Okay, but if we consider in rule number 1, it's less than 182 days. So here he cannot be considered as tax resident because it's less than 182 days. Okay, for rule number 1. Okay, and then for 1st January 2023 until 31st July 2023 here, he lived in Malaysia for 212 days. Okay, under rule number 1, it is more than 182 days. So, it's considered as tax resident. And then for YA24, he only lived in Malaysia for 31 days. So, under rule number 1, he cannot be considered as tax resident because he only lived for 31 days. Okay, but for rule number 2, if he live in Malaysia immediately preceding or immediately following, okay, from 182 days, so under rule number 2, he can be considered as tax resident too. So we have to look at this one. 1st January 2023 is immediately preceding this 31st December 2022. So this one for YA22, it can be considered as tax resident too under rule number 2, although he lived less than 182 days. So he is also a tax resident for YA 2022. How about YA 2024? Okay, YA24, year of assessment 24, can he be considered as a tax resident? Okay, this one, okay, sorry. This one is January, this one is July. He stay in Malaysia in 23 until July, and then he go overseas, and then he come back in 1st January 2024. So for 2024, he cannot be considered as tax resident because these two is not connected. It's not immediately following. So he cannot be considered as tax resident in YA24, but he is a tax resident for YA 2022 and YA 2023. Okay. For this part, is it clear? Ke dah pening?
Clear, Doctor.
Yeah.
Clear. Okay, Alhamdulillah. Okay, so we continue. It's still for rule number 2. Ban in Malaysia for the following period. In YA22, he lived for 202 days. So under rule number 1, he is tax resident. Okay. But for 2023, he lived for only 85 days. Okay. And he went to Hong Kong from 19 December from here and returned to Malaysia on 6th January. Okay. He has an absent for how many days is this? Okay, due to his sister's health condition, he went to Hong Kong for sister's health condition. Okay, under the temporary absent for sisters, it cannot be allowed. Okay, because ill health, okay, for ill health is only applicable to immediate family. Immediate family means a spouse, children, and parents only. Cannot sibling or grandparents, auntie or uncle or cousin or friends cannot. That is not considered as immediate family. For ill health, it's only applicable for spouse, children, and parents. So for these 82 days, is not connected to this 6th January, 19 December and 6th January is not connected. So it cannot apply rule number 2 here. So for 2023 assessment, Ben is not tax resident. Only tax resident for YA 2022. Okay. So this temporary absent part, you have to remember, it's only connected to their employment, their service, their business, or their conference, seminar, or study abroad. Everything related to their employment. And then if it's because of health issues, it's only for immediate family, themselves or their spouse, children, and parents. And for social visit, not exceeding 14 days. Okay, untuk bercuti. Okay, so for this one, example number 3, for rule number 2, so Brian was in Malaysia for YA22 for 205 days. So this one more than 182. So it obviously a rule number 1. Okay. But for 2023, it's 29 days. But he was sent by his employer to attend annual conference in Australia by employer from 23 December, this one from 23 December 2022 until 2nd January. So his absent here is because he went to annual conference sent by his employer. So we consider it as immediately preceding. So this 29 days immediately preceding these 205 days. So he can be considered as tax resident under rule number 2. Okay. So this temporary absent is accepted because he went to Australia, he went overseas as he's being sent by his employer. Okay. So that is for rule number 2. So we go to rule number 3. For rule number 3, he is okay, the individual, the person is in Malaysia for 90 days or more. Okay, 90 hari sahaja. 90 days or more. Okay. But he has to stay here 90 days or more for 3 out of 4 immediately preceding years. Okay. Kalau dia, okay, contohnya dia duduk di sini kurang daripada 182 hari. Tapi dia stay in Malaysia more than 19 days. Okay, for 3 out of 4 year of assessment. Jadi, the individual can be considered as tax resident too. Okay, for the year. Okay, this is a clear example. Okay, Bong was in Malaysia for the following period. Okay, for year of assessment 2021, he is in Malaysia for 183 days. Okay, if you get this kind of question, first you have buat yang mudah dulu lah kan. So yang mudahnya you can recognize the more than 182 days. So first you consider rule number 1 lah. So this one and this one is obviously rule number 1 because it is more than 182 days. Okay, rule number 1. Okay, and for this one and this one, 94 and 93. Okay, for this one, he is in Malaysia for less than 182 days. Okay, then can we consider rule number 2 to this one? Is it connected? This one, 30th September with 1st January? It obviously not connected, so we cannot apply rule number 2 here. Okay. There is also no explanation of why the absent, and the absent is obviously for October, November, December, for 3 months, so more than 90 days. So we cannot apply rule number 2 here. But can we apply rule number 3 here? Cannot too, because for rule number 3, he must be a tax resident or be in Malaysia for more than 90 days for 3 years preceding. But this one is for only 1 year. So for YA 2022, he is a non-resident. But for YA 2025, this one, although he is in Malaysia less than 182 days, so rule number 1 doesn't apply here. Rule number 2 also cannot apply because okay, he is in 2004 for October, and then he come back in April. So it's obviously not connected. So we cannot apply rule number 2. But can we apply rule number 3? Can we apply rule number 3? Obviously we can, because he is in Malaysia for 3 preceding years. This one, 1, 2, and 3. Out of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, because he is a tax resident in Malaysia for 3 preceding years. So in YA 2025, he can be considered as tax resident under rule number 3. Okay. Okay, is this clear? There's another example for rule number 3 for Bakri. Okay. So this is the question. First, we have to look at rule number 1. Only this one is applicable for rule number 1. And then we look at rule number 2, less than 182 days, but immediately preceding. So for this one and this one, December and 1st January is immediately connected immediately following, so it can be considered as rule number 2. How about this one? 31st January until, so it cannot rule number 2 for this one. Until this one also cannot. Okay, for this one it cannot be rule number 2 because this one and this one is less. Okay, less than 182 days. Okay, for this one, rule number 1, rule number 2. And what about rule number 3 for 90 days? Okay, this one is more than 90 days, but can we consider rule number 3? We cannot because it's only 2, 1 and 2. The rule number 3 said the individual must be in Malaysia for 90 days or must be a tax resident for 3-year assessment proceeding sebelum. Jadi kat sini hanya 2, so he cannot considered as a tax resident. Okay, this one is less than 90, tapi also cannot be considered as a tax resident. Okay, and what about this one? 105 days is more than 90 days. Okay, more than 90 days, and he can be considered as tax resident under rule number 3 because for YA 2021 he is a tax resident, satu, and then for YA 2022 he is also a tax resident. Okay, under rule number 2 because it's immediately following. And then although this one is not a resident, but it is more than 90 days, so it can be considered as number 3. So this one we can consider it as rule number 3. So he is a resident, tax resident under rule number 3. Okay, it's different with this one because this is less than 90 days and this is more than 90 days. Okay, so in YA 2024, rule number 3 doesn't apply here because it's less than 90 days. Rule number 3 only applies in YA 2025 because he stays in Malaysia for more than 90 days. Okay. Dah mula pening ke ataupun okay? For rules number 3. Okay, anyone can recap what is rule number 1, rule number 2 and rule number 3? Anyone? Shafiqah? Can someone please recap what is rule number 1, rule number 2 and rule number 3?
Okay, Doctor, I will recap.
Okay.
For rule number 1,
Mm-hmm.
the person must be in Malaysia for 182 days or more.
Okay, good.
For the second rule, the resident is in Malaysia for fewer than 182 days,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an exception for temporary absence.
Okay. What is the exception?
The absence is one,
Mm-hmm.
dia attend conference,
Mm-hmm.
or seminar or study abroad.
Betul.
The second one, dia ada ill health
Mhm.
involving the person or member of the family, immediate family, which is the spouse, children, and parents.
Okay.
And then the third one, social visit not exceeding 14 days.
Okay. Alright. For rule number 3?
Rule number 3, less than 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
Less than 90 days.
Less or more?
90 days or more.
Okay.
90 days or more, and must be um, dia 90 days or more,
Mm-hmm.
and dia have to
This
3 out
one.
of 4 immediate preceding years.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you, Amira.
Okay, welcome.
Okay. For rule number 3, they have to stay in Malaysia for 90 days or more. Okay. But then, the individual have to be a tax resident or reside in Malaysia for 90 days, 3 out of 4 immediately preceding years. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is the final rule. Rule number 4 is called unusual rule. Okay, for unusual rule, the individual can still be regarded as a tax is that you? Can be regarded as a tax resident if he stay in Malaysia for less than 90 days or entirely absent, tak duduk langsung dekat Malaysia for the calendar year, for the year assessment. Okay, but the individual is considered as a tax resident for 3 immediate preceding years. Okay, so he can also be considered as tax resident for the year. Okay, this is unusual rule. Okay, walaupun dia tak ada dekat Malaysia dalam masa lebih atau kurang daripada 90 hari, ataupun dia tak ada langsung dekat Malaysia tahun tu, tapi dia adalah considered as tax resident in 3 immediate preceding year. 3 tahun sebelum tu dia di-consider as tax resident, so tahun tu dia di-consider as tax resident too. This is unusual rule. Okay, this is the example. Bulville. Okay, for kita tengok rule number 1. More than 182 days. So this one obviously, this one and this one, 182. YA 2021, 2022, 2023 and 2025, Bulville is considered as a tax resident under rule number 1 because he is in Malaysia for more than 182 days. Okay, sorry. And then for YA24, he is not in Malaysia at all. Okay, no days in Malaysia at all. But he under unusual rule, under rule number 4, he is considered as a tax resident because he is in Malaysia for 3 immediate preceding years and 1 following year assessment. So it can be considered as tax resident under rule number 4. Okay, the key is 3 immediate preceding years and tax resident in one of the following years. Okay, like this one, 3 immediate preceding year and 1 the following year. Okay, this is the key for rule number 4. Okay, you tax resident versus citizenship is a completely different concept. You cannot be confused between this tax resident and citizenship because a Malaysian citizenship, a Malaysian citizen, if this Malaysian citizen does not stay in Malaysia, he or the individual, he or she can cannot be considered as tax resident if he or she doesn't stay in Malaysia. So although he or she is a citizen, Malaysian citizen, but if they doesn't stay in Malaysia, so it cannot be considered as tax resident. Okay, tax resident can also be considered for Malaysian and also for expatriate, the foreigners who stay in Malaysia and follow these four rules. So he can be considered as tax resident. Okay, siapa-siapa saja yang stay in Malaysia for the following days lah, more than 182, less than 182, more than 90, ataupun the unusual rule. Okay, so he can be qualified to be a tax resident. Okay. Confirmation on period of stay, sebabkan because of the technology now, they use electronic scanning of passport. Kalau dulu dia chop dekat kita punya passport kan, they use dates or stamp on our passport as evidence. So in the past, HDN or the IRB rely on the dates on the stamp lah. But now they use most of the immigration point, they use electronic scanning of passport. So it give a problem lah to IRB or LHDN to detect which day the individual come in Malaysia, which day he left. And so because of this, they accept any written confirmation or evidence. For example, confirmation dari employer bila the employee pergi ke overseas, tarikh bila ataupun bila dia datang. Okay, ataupun dia use airline tickets ataupun confirmation from a travel agency, whichever written document lah as evidence when they come to Malaysia or when they leave Malaysia. Okay, so the four rules is applicable to non-government servant. For government servant, different rules are applied to them. Okay, because they are government servant. For citizen of Malaysia citizen that work as government servant, contohnya yang kerja-kerja government or state government ataupun yang bekerja di badan berkanun macam universiti ni, lecturers and all, we are all government servant. We does not apply the four rules to us, to the government servant. Okay, because they apply this rule. Citizen of Malaysia is deemed to be a tax resident when they are not in Malaysia at all. Okay, because of the employment outside in Malaysia ataupun study di mana-mana university atau professional body outside Malaysia, study abroad and fully sponsored by the employer. Okay, they are considered as tax resident. Walaupun dia tak ada di Malaysia, contohnya yang government servant outside Malaysia ni yang bekerja di embassy, di overseas kan, but they are still considered as tax resident because they are government servant employed by Malaysian government. Walaupun dia duduk di luar negara. Okay, not in Malaysia. Contohnya, okay, Balan, a Malaysian citizen, was sent to work in India by the Malaysian government. Okay, the key is they are working and sent by Malaysian government from November 2021 to October 2025. So in Malaysia, yes and no. All of this, although Balan is not in Malaysia for YA 2022, 2023 and 2024, he is still be considered as tax resident under Section 7(1)(b), which is the rules for Malaysian government servant. Okay. Okay. But this rule 7(1)(b) is only applied to a Malaysian citizen employed in Malaysia Okay, and they have to send by the government overseas to work outside of Malaysia, to work overseas. But if the Malaysian citizen migrated abroad first and then they apply for employment with the Malaysian government abroad, the section 7(1)(b) does not apply to them. Okay, this is because individuals are not considered to be employed in Malaysia. Okay, this 7(1)(b) rules is only applied if the individual is a government servant still in Malaysia. But if they are already go to overseas, contohnya siapa ni? Ana, contohnya Ana, okay. He went to overseas. He stayed in UK for several years, and then when in UK, he applied for a job in Malaysian embassy, contohnya, and then she got the job, and she does not apply to section 7(1)(b) because she's already overseas. She's already at UK, and then she applied. Okay. So this is the comparison between individual resident and non-resident in terms of income tax rate. Okay, for resident is 0% up to 5,000 ringgit per year, and then from 5,001 ringgit, they apply 1% until 30%. But for the non-resident, they have a flat rate of 30% or 15% or 10%, okay, depending. And then resident is entitled to personal relief. This one we will cover in the later chapter, but non-resident cannot. For tax rebate also, resident is entitled to claim the tax rebate, but not for non-resident. And then business income for resident is taxable, but for non-resident, it's taxable through a permanent establishment. For example, if the non-resident have a branch here in Malaysia, so they are taxable. For employment income less than 60 days, for resident is taxable, but non-resident is exempted. And remittance of foreign income for residents also taxable, but for the non-resident is exempted. This one, as we discussed in the yesterday lah, in chapter 1. Okay. Okay, the meeting will end in 5 minutes, but it's okay, nanti boleh masuk semula. Okay. Okay, this is some exercise for you. Boleh cuba attempt and we discuss together for Beatrice. Okay, if the meeting ended, nanti boleh masuk semula link yang sama ya. Saya buat semula link.
Okay, Doktor.
Okay, so jom boleh kita attempt this one. For 2021, YA 2021, YA 2022, 23, 24 and 25. Okay, for which one, YA berapa yang we can apply rule number 1 here? For rule number 1, which YA, which year of assessment? Anyone?
2022.
2022, this one's rule number 1. Okay, and then
2023.
2023, rule number 1. Ada lagi tak? Tak ada kan?
Tak ada.
Okay. How about this one? Ada tak? Lebih tak? YA 25, is it more than 182? days in Malaysia. 14 plus 143 plus 18 is equal to, okay, for YA 25 equals to
182.
182. Is it 182? 14 plus 143 plus 18. 175. Betul tak?
Ha, 175.
Kan? We cannot add the days they are outside Malaysia. So set this one we cannot add because dia dekat outside Malaysia kan. So we cannot apply rule number 1 here. Okay, they only 175. So can we apply rule number 2 anywhere? Rule number 2. For this one, this is immediately preceding. Adakah dia connected? 31st December until 1st January. So it's connected, okay? Betul? So we can apply rule number 2 here. Less than 182 days. And for this one, YA 23 and YA 24, is it connected? This one and this one?
No.
No, kan? It's obviously not connected. October until April. But so there's no rule number 2 here, and this one's not connected to anything. How about rule number 3? Rule number 3, they must stay in Malaysia for more than 90 days. More than 90 days. So this is more than 90 days. And then what is another rule of rule number 3? More than 90 days and must be a tax resident or stay in Malaysia for more than 90 days. Okay? So, can we apply rule number 3 here in YA 24?